So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. Brilliant to see you all. Obviously, in different times, we'd all be in a room together, and it'd be great to get to know you all. There's some familiar faces to me, which is nice. Thanks for coming, but a lot that I don't recognise as well. So looking forward to hopefully getting to know at least some of you. My name is Mark. I'm going to be hosting the webinar. I think the goal of today is to sort of deepen our understanding of what business as a force for good means. Like I say, in better times we'd be in a room together and we could all share our ideas, but we're going to try and facilitate that to give people a chance to meet each other in small groups, so that you might meet some people that are thinking along similar lines, share some ideas, and we'll look at a couple of case studies, including what we're trying to do at the Imagination Factory. We are absolutely not putting ourselves forward as people who've completely solved all this, far from it. We're just on the journey, but having started on this journey, we wanted to at least share some of what we've learned. So yeah, that's the sort of goal for today. If anyone's not here for the webinar about business as a force for good, well done for hacking into our Zoom room. You're very welcome anyway, and hopefully you might learn something, meet some interesting people, and who knows, maybe we'll change your mind. So this is a sort of a quick overview really of what we're going to do. A brief introduction. Moving on, just some quick statistics just to sort of set the landscape really. These have all come from a impacting report in the UK. 90% of Generation Z, that's people born between 1996 and 2010, think that businesses should address critical issues in society, which is quite a phenomenal statistic. More than half of consumers that were surveyed said they would pay extra for companies with a dedicated social impact plan. Whether they actually do or not, that remains to be seen, but that's what they said they would do. The vast majority of people want companies to address social justice issues, to get involved in what's going on in the world around them. And 2/3 of young people said they wouldn't take a job at a company with poor corporate social responsibility practices. So to me, and there's so many more statistics that we could pull out, but as a broad brushstroke, that shows to me that the world expects more from businesses than just making money and providing us with the products and services that we want. And I just thought I'd share a quick Chinese proverb because it provokes a bit of thought. This one says, if you plan for 1 year, sow rice. If you plan for 10 years, then plant trees. But if you're planning for 100 years, educate people. And for me, this, I love my cheesy Chinese proverbs. And for this one reminds me why we probably ended up in a position not so long ago where businesses were really associated more with negative impacts on the world. And it's because of this short-termism that, you know, business owners and leaders don't really look much beyond the next quarter. And they certainly don't stop to think about a legacy. So maybe that's sort of why we got ourselves into a bit of a pickle in the first place. Is another one of my favorites. Don't worry, I'm not going to keep going on Chinese proverbs. I just think this one's fantastic. If your face is ugly, you can't blame the mirror. So it's a good one to sort of keep in mind. And I think for too long, businesses and individuals, we've looked around at the world and we've been quick to see all the problems, but we forget that actually it's just a reflection of who we are. So if the world has got social justice issues, if the world has got environmental issues, et cetera, then as a business, as businesses, we can look around and say, well, it's probably got something to do with me. So that's a sort of I guess a bit of a background to why business as a force for good matters, because businesses can actually be a very strong force for things that are not good. But it's not like that across the board. Actually, there's a lot of companies that have been thinking about this for a very long time. It's not a new idea at all. Many of you are going to be familiar with Patagonia, the outdoor clothing company. And although it was founded in 1973, even prior to that, that company and the people behind it had a really strong commitment to sustainable practices. And interestingly for them, it came from the fact that they were climbers and surfers, and year on year, they would go back to the same spots where they were carrying out their climbing trips, and they saw the impact not only of just general changes in the environment, but their own impact as well. So there's a famous story where Yves Chouinard was making blacksmithing his own whatever they're called, crimps, to bash into the mountain to help him climb. And he realized as he went back each year, they were having a physical impact on their environment, and not a very positive one. So he changed the design and he used aluminium so that they were much softer and gave the same grip, but didn't have that negative impact. But also in 1991, they suffered a pretty major setback due to a recession. They had to let 20% of their staff go. And Yves' response was very interesting. He took his whole management team climbing in Patagonia. And while they were on the rock face, they decided to figure out what kind of company they wanted to be. And so they literally forged their pretty exceptional values during that trip, forged in sort of hard times and on the rock face, quite literally. So it's not surprising that they went on to be the first Californian company to become a certified B Corp. We'll talk about B Corp a bit more later on. So yeah, lots of businesses such as Patagonia have been thinking about this, doing this for a long time. But I think it's fair to say that it feels like there's a groundswell over the last 5 years. It's become a lot more talked about. You find lots of interviews and articles about it in sort of major newspapers. And you've even got companies like Brewdog who, in a classic punk move, have decided that being carbon neutral is not enough, that if they're going to have a positive impact, they want to actually be carbon negative. And their approach to that is, well, let's go and buy a forest and plant so many trees that we can actually be carbon negative. So I think, you know, we're finding that it's not a new concept, but there are definitely new expressions to the way this is happening, which is kind of, I guess, where we come in. So that's a sort of a broad brushstroke maybe of how I'm thinking about business as a force for good. But as I said, we really want to give you guys an opportunity to meet each other, and you don't want to hear my voice for the whole time. So I'm just going to hand you over to Claire quickly, who's going to explain how the breakout rooms are going to work. Good. So hopefully that was helpful to have a bit of time to sort of meet some people and share some thoughts together. I'm not going to labour the feedback because I know it could be difficult, but just wanted to sort of throw it out there really. And if you want to respond, just unmute and go for it. You don't need to put your hand up or anything like that. So I wondered if anyone had any thoughts on why businesses should get involved. Why not just leave social impact and having a positive impact on the world? Why not just leave that to charities and governments that arguably might be more sort of skilled or have a vision that's sort of specifically focused on that? Did anyone have any thoughts on that?
So one thing we came back to a couple of times in our room is, well, referring to point 2 and point 3 in the list, that businesses have a role to play in a positive impact and businesses shouldn't leave it all to charities. But businesses, compared to charities, have a much wider scope. That the total number of businesses in the country and the amount in our society of the influence is currently much higher than charities. And that, you know, any help that they can give is beneficial because of that.
Interesting. Yeah, so businesses actually have a much wider reach. And anybody else from any other groups have a similar or a different response?
We had one really, which was to do with society, and you know, companies aren't separate from. We all live on the same planet, and we're all part of the same society. And companies and organisations, businesses, can work with charities and governments to solve some of these problems, as opposed to working in a completely different silo, which is unreal from our thoughts.
Yeah, we didn't necessarily discuss it specifically, but we see that that business can be is often closer to the people that it's, you know, its audience, whatever they might be, and understand sort of their needs, wants, dreams, aspirations, and things like that. And those things can be they're not often accessible or immediately obvious to government and other bodies like that. So it's good in that regard. Just a sort of a truer, closer reflection of what people are really thinking and needing and doing and are sometimes fearful of as well.
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, businesses potentially have a closer link with the people that they're serving.
Yeah. And I think our team very much had a similar kind of approach in terms of, you know, businesses being able to set expectation and influence others and have that kind of snowball effect. And they're in a position and have a role to provide positive, you know, a positive role versus kind of a negative role. But also just, you know, the team felt, you know, that, you know, they felt that they could rely more on business versus kind of government. And maybe move a bit faster also. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yes, speed to react and the ability to build a legacy that sticks in a culture. Yeah. Okay. Did anyone think about what might happen, what might backfire? So if you commit to being a force for good, how it might backfire for a business?
Yeah, we hit upon this notion of maybe a potential for, as you know, one phrase of greenwashing, for example, on the case of environmental issues, that you may get a sort of a desperate kind of need to look on the surface as if you're doing the right thing, but actually when you scratch below the surface, there's it's just a you know, a veneer of green hiding the reality. So there is a potential for that, but that's I don't know how you deal with it. You just try and have to sort of reveal it and call it out and correct it, get it sorted.
On that score, there was a call out in the papers covering the sort of PAL Act between MPs giving a tender for PPE and other COVID-related things, how a few companies have really cashed in big time. And they cashed in, they didn't have anything to do with that business of PPE, but they were friendly with one of the MPs who were doing the tenders, and how unfair that whole tender system was, that maybe they should be contributing to the big deficit pile that is somewhere. That would be nice to see them doing that.
Yeah, interesting.
And what I said in our chat, I just joined very late, but was the thought of all the masks and all the gloves that are littering everywhere, that it would be nice if that would have been thought out well beforehand, and in the environmental sustainability, all of that. So now there's a whole fashion thing that you wear a mask to match your outfit or whatever, but those are at least cloth that you can wash rather than all the dreadful stuff that is just chucked and into the streets as well.
Yeah, back to our Chinese proverb that I think you missed earlier, Mira. That's definitely a case of thinking about just 1 year ahead and sowing rice rather than thinking about 10 or 100 years ahead.
I think to echo that, and you know, the surface level thinking, and also the short termism of it all, which is what our group just discussed, is that it might stop people from taking that systems level of thinking away from solving immediate problems. So taking a more linear path, because there's this big objective to, you know, be the force of good, and the force of good means one specific thing, rather than looking at how does something impact in a more circular way.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, we'll talk about the circular economy in a moment. But yeah, you do arrive there. As soon as you start thinking about how business can have a positive impact, you tend to arrive at the circular economy quite quickly.
Yeah. Because yeah, that was something that came up in our conversation as well, as you know, different people's view of good and what that means to everyone. And whilst it might be having a positive effect environmentally, you know, what does that mean for some people? For an example, shifting jobs, like from a manufacturing perspective, or shifting manufacturing somewhere, you know, to have a positive effect on the environment might not be a positive effect on people's livelihoods and jobs, for an example.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, did anyone else in their rooms tackle what business as a force for good actually means? Was anyone brave enough to come up with a definition, or what the discussions go along those lines?
Yeah, someone came up with the, I think it's Mario out of our group came up with the description of a company having, it's where value and values converge.
Ooh, that's nice. Value and values converge. I'm going to write that. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah, I think Mark Carney said it at the Reith lectures as well. So I've heard it before, but yeah, it's I thought it was really good.
That's interesting. We've come up with our own proverb. I like it.
That goes well with the idea of impact investing. So if one looks at those values together, that goes really well.
Yeah, so where investors put their money, and therefore where businesses grow and new businesses come to the front, has a lot to do with it as well, doesn't it?
I guess any physics buffs among us may be able to sort of go back to the square one of what creates a force, which is many different, I'm trying to remember sort of what it is, but many different interactions that if they're not sort of stopped will create a force. So it's lots of things coming together to create the force to go forwards. And it can, you know, so it's multi. We talked in our group about everybody's different talents and what people bring, you know, all the skills within a company, and how that can affect the force for good.
We were talking about values there, and value and values, and there's a thing, I can't remember the provenance of it, but there's a thing called the value equation, where value is a perception of in somebody's mind, is a function of in terms of sort of companies and organizations, in terms of the perception of the brand, the perception of the design and the quality of the product, service or experience that they're providing, divided by the price you're willing to pay for it. So the value perception and the price you're willing to pay when you think about what the impact is, but you know, it's the price beyond the money you're parting with, as it were. That's kind of like an interesting thing. So the kind of the value equation still applies. It's just there's a slight tweak to what we consider to be the price and the value, the perceptions of a brand, the design and the quality of its services and products. I think it still works. Yeah,
that's interesting. And maybe with that, you could actually say it's not just the price that we're willing to pay, but the price that we are prepared for society to pay.
Yeah. And indeed, I suppose the makeup of a price, if you break it down, there's a monetary aspect, and then there's a kind of impact aspect. But then there's maybe a kind of, there's room for a tax, as it were, to, you know, to give these people, to make the final value perception work in someone's head. There's actually an additional price you might have to pay, but you'll do it willingly because the rest of it stacks up. You know, it adheres to your overall perception, or reinforces a positive perception of the value when viewed in entirety. Yeah.
Does that not then put the price onto the consumer or the user? And should we not, if we're not considering business as a force for good, what price the businesses should take on themselves? You know.
Well, that's yeah. I mean,
like less profit.
Yeah, but I suppose it's. I'm just thinking. I suppose, like, for example, if you took the notion of like sustainable meat or something like that, good quality meat that hasn't hit, just as a very simple kind of proposition.
Yeah.
yeah, we can see the price of like good quality meat probably going to go up, but for some very good reasons. We're probably going to start eating less of it, which has got another impact. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, that it's all about the price you're willing to pay. So it's going to have to be modulated by the people providing it and the sort of the needs of what the consumer is willing to cough up for, I suppose. But yeah, you raise a good point. Hopefully it becomes a virtuous thing where it's sort of the impact is spread beyond. So
Okay, well, thanks everyone. It sounds like you did have some really sort of interesting discussions in your rooms. I wish I could have been in each one and heard them all. But sort of we've gone quite sort of high level, which is great. I think that's where you go naturally with these things, because they're such big concepts to consider. So what I wanted to do is just sort of share a little bit about our story and bring it down to sort of a more concrete level, really, about where we've actually been trying to work this out in practical terms. And as I said, we've only really just started on this journey. So it's as much to sort of share our thoughts and then have some sort of questions and answers afterwards. So just going to share my screen again. Yeah, so I mean, like all things, it began in a pub. Not all things, like all good things, it began in a pub. So the company actually began with 4 friends who were sitting in a pub in Richmond, and we saw an article in the newspaper by UK Sport. This was 2010, and they were asking for, they called them garage innovators. They were looking for people who might have a good idea to help Team GB in the run up to the 2012 Olympics. So we kind of, as you do as designers, we sat in the pub and couldn't help ourselves, scribbled a few ideas on the back of a napkin, submitted them, and actually one of the ideas won the competition, which was very exciting at the time. We thought we might be able to contribute to the success of Team GB in the 2012 Olympics. Unfortunately, due to some sort of slightly silly sponsorship issues with a certain large sports manufacturing brand, we weren't able to work on the idea that we originally submitted. Nevertheless, UK Sport asked us to work with a Paralympic table tennis player, a lady called Zai, and so we helped to develop an active harness for this lady, because she was paralyzed from the chest down, and she was having issues in training as how far she could reach. She wanted to train to the absolute limits of her capabilities, but because of her personality, she tended to go beyond those limits and throw herself out of the wheelchair, which was a little bit disconcerting for the coaches and also for the UK Sport who was sponsoring her, because she used to sort of break herself in quite dramatic ways. So yeah, we got involved with that project at the time, and I guess what that did was sort of cemented into the founders this concept that, you know, design really can have a positive impact on someone's life, and so I think that's kind of embedded in, and many designers, if you speak to them, will say that's one of the reasons they've gone into it. Design engineers quite often are interested in the problems in the world around them and how they might use their skills and creativity to solve them. I mean, that's not to say that all our projects are inclined that way. I think it's probably a bit of a stretch to say that the heads-up display that we developed for an adventurer who flies around with his homemade jetpack is having any positive impact on the world. But, you know, you do what you can. So yeah, that's kind of how we sort of got the business going. And then you know, one of the things that you want to do if you want to have a positive impact is you need to listen to the people in your team, but this comes with a health warning, because sometimes they come up with ideas that lead you into really uncharted territory and you have no idea what you're going to do about it. But if you listen to them and you take them seriously, then you kind of have to at least take it on board. So soon after we started the business, we thought we should have some business cards. Anyone remember those business cards? They were like these little sort of paper things that you used to actually physically hand to people. You didn't like wash your hands before or after. Sometimes you preceded it with a handshake, maybe even if you knew them well, a hug. Very strange times that we used to live in. But we had these little things called business cards, and businesses would go and get them when they started off. And so one member of our team said, well, if you're going to go and get these cards printed, have you thought about where you're going to get them from? And so we were like, well, probably moo.com or something like that. And he said, well, look, if you're serious about the impact that you have on the environment, perhaps you should think about the source of those business cards, and also the ink. And he knew what he was doing because he had already done some research, but he sort of tripped us up because we thought this will be easy. We'll just look for some business cards in the UK. This is 2017, 2016, 2017. We'll look for some business cards that are, printed with good inks and on sustainable board. And he threw in this concept of something called cradle to cradle thinking, which some of you might be familiar with. It's an approach to the way things are produced and manufactured, where you think not just cradle to grave, but you think all the way through. What resources are you using, and what's left behind when you've manufactured something, and what impact does that have? And cradle to cradle encourages you to really try and keep technical aspects of your product and the biological aspects of your product separate, because the world around us is not very good at dealing with those things once they're mixed together. So in the case of a business card, very simple thing, what that means is not having toxic inks. So we thought, right, that's pretty straightforward. Believe it or not, in those, not so many years ago, there was not a single business card supplier in the UK that could guarantee their inks were not toxic. So in the end, we looked for someone who was cradle to cradle certified, because we knew that meant they would have gone through the process and would have to prove that their inks were not toxic. Everyone was doing sustainable card. The actual paper board bit of it was easy. And that basically led us to a company in Austria. So we had to source our cradle to cradle certified business cards from this company in Austria. And I know what you're thinking. That's probably pretty bad from the point of view of carbon emissions, and you'd be right. So it wasn't a perfect solution by any means, but it really showed us when you start to grapple with issues, if as a business, you just listen to one person in your team who says, have you considered cradle to cradle business cards? It can take you down this route, which is complicated. But we were encouraged by it as well, because we learned a lot about the circular economy. We learned a lot through the process of doing these cards, and actually they were quite a sort of a talking point as well, because when we gave them to someone, we instructed them not to throw it away. In other words, not to put it in the bin, and actually, preferably, don't even put it in the recycling bin. These cards were so well thought through that you could put them in the soil. So we said to them, look, if you've got a garden, stick them in the soil. If you haven't, find your local park and just dig a hole and bury it there. Try and make sure no one's watching. So that was quite an interesting talking point, because no one had ever thought about the business cards and the ink and what happens afterwards. And these things were getting passed around all the time. So we sort of didn't really want to stop at business cards, and we were lucky enough to have a client who was as keen as us to apply cradle to cradle thinking, and she came to us for the design of a baby food tool. And this was great, because we again sort of focused on the materials, and we were able to find a supplier, a large multinational supplier, for a cradle to cradle certified plastic for the transparent part. So that was really exciting, because it meant that company had passed really rigorous sort of standards in the production and also in the chemistry really of that plastic, that it is completely non-toxic and doesn't cause harm when it's in the environment. However, what we weren't able to do was find anything for the rubber grip. You can see on the image there, there's a bit of a rubber grip, which is essential to the way that the product functions, really. And that is still a problem to today. As designers and manufacturers, there's still a lack of that material. And the other thing was, unfortunately, the client that we did this for found that the cost of becoming officially Cradle to Cradle certified was prohibitive. So although as a business she wanted to be able to say she was doing the absolute best she could, she couldn't even afford the rubber stamp, Cradle to Cradle certified rubber stamp. And that's her situation even until today. Once she gets to scale, maybe that will change. But that was again another bit of learning for us. And then we sort of carried on thinking about the theme of materials. I think as designers and engineers, we're very conscious that we're putting things out there that end up in landfill. And so we stayed with that kind of thought process, I guess. And we were part of a European funded project, working on making 100% recycled plastics. And for those of you in the room who aren't familiar with design and manufacturing, it sounds like it should be pretty straightforward, but it's actually really difficult. And for the last 4 years, we've been working with an amazing group of polymer scientists and recyclers and injection molders, designers. And the Internet of Things sensor that you can see pictured here is actually made from 100% recycled plastic that's come originally from what they call a consumer waste stream. So it's not coming from an industrial sort of recycling stream that's a lot easier. It's coming from somewhere where it might be contaminated and all sorts of issues. And the thing about this project is, whilst I'm really proud of what we've managed to achieve, and it's clearly the right way to go with this issue with plastics and plastics getting into the oceans and landfill, recycling has a place. During the project, we continually get confronted with these statistics that show that the recycling of plastic is really the thin end of the wedge. I mean, we're talking about a fraction of 1% of the things that we use day to day that are made from plastic will actually be recycled. So, well, what's a small design and engineering firm supposed to do? We want to be a force for good, and we'd gone down the route of thinking, well, what does that mean for sustainable design? And that's obviously very important within our workflow. And we want to work on projects with a purpose, whether that's helping people with disabilities or working on medical devices, all those sorts of things. But really, it made us think there must be more. It's got to be more than just the outputs of our work and creativity. And that sort of led us back to thinking about BCorp. And in fact, there's someone on the call today, Joss, from a jewelry company called EC1. And I knew that he had recently certified. So I asked Joss what it meant for him as a business. And what I found really interesting was that beyond just what it meant for him in terms of his materials as a jeweler, he said that it had had a really profound impact on the structure of the business and how it was sort of governed and put together. So I kind of revisited the idea of becoming a B Corp, and in fact, this was the route we decided to go down, and we were certified in October last year. And really what it meant for us is that we look at the whole thing as a much bigger picture. So how are we governed, who are our customers, how do we treat our workers, and all those kinds of things. So we're very much at the beginning of this journey, and B Corp's not right for everyone, but it's certainly sort of been the thing that's kind of helped us to figure out what we can do beyond just our design work. So I don't want to go on any further because I know we're nearly out of time, but I just want to give sort of 5 minutes for questions and answers and any comments that people might have.
How long did that process take you to become B Corp certified?
Good question. So
and how was that affected by the number of people that you employ?
Right. Yes. Okay. We started in March, and we had some help from a lady called Annabelle, who was on the call earlier. I think she might still be. So if you do the process yourself, it's very, very detailed, and you have to look at so many things about your business. I think it could.
As I'm finding out.
So we went from March, and then we were certified in October. The reality is I think we finished all of our submissions in about July. So it was a good 3 to 4 months process with support. So we had sort of once a week, we were getting support on that. And there was quite a delay after that in being certified. I think sometimes it's a bit quicker, but obviously between July and October, there was a lot going on.
Yeah. Did you involve any kind of any legal services in that process to get things kind of, because quite a lot of it is, it's not just having the intention, it's the documenting it, right? And that's I mean, it's massively time consuming, particularly for someone like me, because we're really small. So yeah, is there kind of a lot of, would you say there's a lot of cost associated with kind of?
No, not, I would say we did all of that, apart from Annabelle supporting us. We did the rest of it all in-house. A lot of time, as you say, went into looking at your policies, but if you start the process, you get a lot of support from BLab. And in fact, there is already one of the major things you have to do is change your constitution as a company, and there's a template that they give you. So that could seem like a really daunting thing if you're looking at that from the outset, but they make that bit really easy. The bit that we found most difficult was working through the policies. But again, there's a process to it whereby you can have a stab at it and then you can get some feedback. But yeah, I would recommend if you can get someone who's been through the process before, I think they're called B leaders.
Yeah, we've been speaking to someone already and having conversations, and she was really, really helpful. And then they generally what they tend to do is they tend to run their own kind of consultancy in the rest of their time that help people kind of achieve that status. That's kind of a win-win from our point of view, in terms of from a time perspective. I'd like to kind of get someone that kind of goes, do you know what, just tell me what I need to do, what I need to rewrite, what I need to do this, because there's a massive resource in terms of kind of the time investment in researching that myself. But then at the same time, to do that realistically, that's a lot of money to get someone to manage that process for you, and that's just not value to us. So I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, we'll get there. We're still very interested in doing it, and we want to achieve it, hopefully this year. But yeah, I mean, it is quite a resource. So well done for getting it in the first place.
Yeah, go on, Josh.
I was just going to say, John, that lots of that stuff is online that you can pick up. And the only thing is, if you outsource too much of it, it doesn't then kind of filter into the company, and you don't hold it yourself, as on a daily basis. Because I felt the same way as you, like, oh, look, somebody else can do all the paperwork and then we'll get the certificate. But actually, you kind of have to buy into it, and on a really personal level, if you're running the business or if you're
it's slightly different. I mean, we're very small as an organization, so we've got certain practices in place that we do already, which are kind of like, we give 10% of our profits to charity every single year. So we'll do things like that, but there's no documentation that says that's kind of how we behave. So I guess it's kind of the investment of time in kind of, I don't want to greenwash anything. I know kind of, what we stand for as an organization and what we want to kind of achieve going forwards. It's just because we're small, it's a disadvantage of kind of having to invest that time as well.
No, I think the thing I'd say to you is that if you're already doing some of these things, it's going to be much easier. We weren't giving everything to charity, and so actually now we have to find make a policy up. Who are we going to get? the people who work with me, which charity do you want to go with? You know, so it
Yeah,
makes it much harder. But anyway.
I've actually found, like, because we've reached out to quite a lot of BCorp community, which is why we got the invite to come here, which is fantastic. And everyone in that community is coming forwards, going, if you need a hand, if you need advice, if you need this, if you need that, it's amazing. It's been really inspiring to kind of meet other people that kind of want to achieve what we want to achieve, really.
Do you think it's just a question, John, about having the documentation in the first place? I'm kind of thinking that if you were a company that, for instance, let's say had ISO 9001, you've got the documentation there, and then it's a question of then reviewing that in light of BCorp, or is it just a fact of just not having the bandwidth at all to do it?
So it's kind of, so we've set up from the beginning in terms of to behave and to exist in a certain way. We've never done anything to kind of to document that. It's predominantly a business that was set up by myself and my wife, so we kind of, you know, that spills out, those behaviors spill over to our personal life as well as our kind of, which is why, you know, we do what we do. And I think that it's more a case of just never having documented that and never kind of having the framework. And, you know, I know it's a lot of work. I don't want to shy away from it. And actually, I'm really looking forward to, as we grow, to having that framework in place that can kind of hold us to account, that we can kind of, you know, everyone kind of comes in. And I don't envy these companies that are set up in a certain way that then have to kind of go back and kind of justify it to lots of people that they employ that might not necessarily hold those values. So it literally is just the resource involved in kind of getting stuff done, because, you know, we need to pull money in, particularly at the moment. I mean, it's, you know, it's tough for everyone.
Yeah, and I think what I'd probably say to that is, you know, you might just take longer. You know, if
Yes.
you chip away at it, it's fairly. I mean, it's a fairly systematic process. If you start on it, then there's just things to chip away on. So yeah, in fact, Annabelle, I think, is on the call now. I don't know if you've got anything that you wanted to add to that.
Sorry. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I've got a child in the background, so I'm sorry if there's noise. Yeah, I would say it is really systematic. That's one thing about it, but it does require a little bit of knowledge on some of the bits that you get taught about when you do the B-Leader course. So I would say, yes, it's helpful sometimes just having someone to come alongside to ask you the questions about the different policies and to make sure that you agree with the things that they're talking about as a business and as a company. Because I also worked with Joss when we did it EC1 as well. It's difficult. It's also interesting doing it across different platforms. So what does your business do? What's it?
We're a design studio, so brand comms, yeah.
Yeah, and are you making an actual physical product, or are you just helping others design?
No, service industry, yeah.
So yeah, so there's obviously different tertiary, different things, different levels for different people depending on all this. You know all of this anyway. But I would just say, from my perspective, I've always just loved working alongside people, and this isn't a pitch to get the job. I'm just saying working alongside people is really helpful. I'm so sorry, this is really noisy. Yeah, just working alongside people is really helpful, because you focus people in on things. So when I worked with Mark, it was really helpful, because every week I'd come in and say, so where are we at on this? Where are we at on that? And the great thing about that was that we got a system in place that worked really well, so that we could then tick off. It's like a tick list. It basically is a tick list, a big tick list.
And I think that's where the challenge has been for me, because in terms of kind of, you know, creative brain is a bit all over the place, and structure is not necessarily my strong point, and kind of, you know, forming things into, and it is very structured. It is kind of what have you done? Check this off, get the documentation. And I've had some amazing conversations and some really useful stuff in terms of how to plan it and how to evidence log stuff, and to make sure that I do evidence log stuff, because they will ask for it. So I've had some really interesting conversations. It's just that kind of, you know, maybe that's my brain really struggles with that. It's all right, kind of making things look nice, and but it's kind of
And I come from a design background as well, so I totally understand that. So kind of systematic things aren't always kind of natural to me either. But one thing I would say that if you ever wanted just to chat about it briefly afterwards, I'm very happy to do that. And just if there's other.
Well, these guys have got our email addresses. I mean, I'd be really grateful, Mark, if you can kind of just connect.
Sorry, that made much sense. I think Ren is being a bit of a distraction, so I'll mute myself now.
No, thanks. That was really useful.
Great. Well, we've gone slightly over time, so I'd like to sort of bring the session to an end. We'll send out something afterwards, a little bit of follow-up. What would be really interesting as well would be to know if anyone sort of has any comments on how the session went, what was good, what we could do better. But also if there are other things that we might be able to do, because it's the first webinar that we've tried running as Imagination Factory, and there's many other things that I'm sure we could do. So yeah, maybe look out for that sort of dropping into your email, and if you've got any thoughts, let us know, and we're happy to organise some other events.
One more question.
Oh, there's one more question in the chat. Can I ask, what effects on the business have you noticed since getting B Corp status? Okay, so yeah, that's a really good question. I think for us, it's the effects are we're still beginning to see. We've got some sort of specific goals that we've got set for ourselves that we need to keep reviewing, coming back to, and making sure that we're sort of on target with. I think one of the sort of specific things we did was start to look at some of our suppliers. So where we get office equipment from, some fairly sort of straightforward things, which would have been really easy to say that we did, but to put off. And now we've got something in place to make sure that we do that. I think, but beyond that, I think the biggest impact has been on our policies and on the way that we govern the business. So that's had some sort of fairly significant changes, and anyone from the Imagination Factory is on the call right now. You'll be aware that we're sort of reviewing contracts and things like that to sort of even look at holiday policies and working hours and things like that. So some pretty profound sort of under the hood changes to the way the business is governed, really.
Joss mentioned something.
Thank you.
Joss, you said in our group an interesting thing, a knock-on effect for your business of being B Corp. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, just that I felt that the whole company had a purpose, which and it just cemented everything together. We've also had last year our increase in sales. We were 10% up despite being shut for 4 months. So I'm really hoping when they let the shops open again, we'll do well. But yeah, we'll see. Yeah. But I mean, obviously, we're not doing it purely from a financial point of view, but there is an uplift financially. So yeah. Yeah,
and I think that's a good final point to make, actually, is that, you know, it's not all about the social impact. They B Corp in particular, they ask you to commit to a triple bottom line, which is that it's people, planet, and profits. You know, it's very much about being a business. There's no point, you know, running your business into the ground because you're trying to have a positive impact. It should be the opposite. As we said earlier, business has got a wide reach into the world around us. So profit is a part of that to enable your business to grow. Any last question from anyone? Otherwise, I'll bring the session to a close. Great. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. It's been really good to meet you. I hope you've enjoyed that, and all the best for the rest of your day.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.